Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to Diz Connected, an unofficial Disney podcast of magical proportions. I'm Whit Laxon, your Disney enthusiast host, and coming up, people don't even realize that Splash Mountain is inspired by Song of the South.
Oh, I know.
People don't realize that Zippity Doo-Dah is from Song of the South.
Yeah.
It's part 1 in our series, Lights, Camera, Live Action Disney History.
The boy has to shoot old Yeller.
Spoiler!
Sorry.
We're shining a spotlight on the live-action Disney films of the 1940s and 50s. Hey guys, what's up? It's Whit, back for another episode of Diz Connected, and joining me today, as always, via Skype, is my friend and fellow Disney enthusiast, Katie Carter. Hey Katie, how's it going?
Hey Whit, it's going good.
So Katie, today we are starting a new series of Diz Connected podcasts, and it's called Lights, Camera, Live Action Disney History. I don't think I even told you the name of what I had come up with.
You did not, but I like it.
Okay. But that's kind of the name I wanted to go with. And, a couple of years ago, we did a series of 6 episodes based on, or all about the history of Disney animation. Those were really successful, and we've been talking about doing this live action series for a while. Didn't really get around to it, but we're finally doing it. And I'm excited because these movies are really great and they're really special, and I have so much nostalgia for them, but they're kind of forgotten about.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, we have like this new era of Disney live action movies, which is great, and that's garnered a lot of fans, but I feel like people kind of push the live action classics to the side, especially when compared to like the classic Disney animation. So yeah, this is exciting.
I know. Yeah, they're not getting passed down so much generation to generation, and it's exciting to kind of talk about them because they were passed down to me and you too, I assume. Yes. But also, we're both just really big film history buffs in general, besides being Disney fans. So it's all in there, and we know kind of what we're talking about, maybe. But I should point out that we haven't seen some of these movies, or maybe even a lot of these movies that we're going to be talking about. They're not so easy to access, although I'm sure maybe like now with the internet, I don't know, they might be on YouTube like to buy or something, but you want to pay for them for me to watch? Thanks. So yeah, there's going to be some that we may just have some information about where I've, done research and haven't seen it. But for the ones that we have seen, we'll talk about, what we think of them. We'll share memories and all of that. And also, just like the animation series we did, we're going to talk about the impact that these films had on pop culture when they were released and still today. And so these movies, at least the classics, because we were going to start all the way back in 1941, they really capture a time gone by. And I think if you visit, Frontierland or Liberty Square, at Disneyland or Walt Disney World, that's kind of what a lot of these first Disney live action movies really capture, the 1800s, the early 1900s, and then some are more modern upon their release. And then, of course, today's films are mostly modern with live action that they do. And you're also going to see a lot of the same actors and directors and all of that in these movies. So that's why we are going in order. Originally, I'd kind of thought, well, we'll kind of just do categories because we haven't seen so many of these and that sort of thing. But it would be tricky to not go in order here and just have to say, oh, hey, this actor was in this movie, and this movie, and this movie that we haven't talked about. So we are going to start in 1941. Today's episode is going to be the 1940s and 50s. There aren't necessarily specific eras to live action Disney history, although I think you could say, in some cases, for a certain amount of years they were doing this, and a certain amount of years they were doing this, as far as genres and stuff go. But we're going to do this like by decades and by like 5-year increments. So yeah, it's going to be very nice. But these movies, they're not mindless. They're very, strong films. I think a lot of them do stand the test of time as far as quality goes, maybe not getting passed it down, of course. But yeah, Katie, are you ready to do this? I'm going to stop talking now.
I am ready.
Okay. All right. Let's do it. Well, starting in 1941, the first live-action Disney movie, it was actually a hybrid of live-action and animation. It's called The Reluctant Dragon. Katie, have you seen this movie?
I believe I have a long time ago. I kind of remember parts of it, and maybe I have just seen parts of it and not the full movie. But yeah, it's really interesting, and it's almost more like a documentary in a way. It's like a tour of the Disney studios.
Right, yeah. It's a tour of the Burbank lot in California, which had really just opened, I believe, maybe like a year earlier from when this was released, because, they paid for it with Snow White money there.
Right.
But it takes you behind the scenes of animation, and you get to see some of the 9 Old Men. Walt Disney even makes an appearance. But there is kind of a story to it, and you have this... You have this man who, I believe he was trying to sell the rights to the story of the Reluctant Dragon to Disney. And his wife is like trying to talk him into selling the rights. So she takes him to the Disney lot. She drops him off and she's like, I'm going shopping. And then he goes in and just has a tour. And you get to see all of these great behind the scenes shots of how these animated movies were being made back then at a time when animated feature films were just, becoming a thing. And so you see the multi-plane camera, and it's really cool. I mean, I saw it actually whenever Turner Classic Movies first started their Disney Vault series, because that was like the first one they played, I want to say. And it starts out in black and white. It turns to color later on. And there are some animated, it's not like Mary Poppins, but there are some animated sequences and some animated little shorts in the movie. And so Casey Jr. was featured from Dumbo, and you see an actress making the sound of the train. And then there's also Goofy's How to Ride a Horse, which was like the first of many like how-to Goofy shorts.
Right.
And then by the end you see the Reluctant Dragon short. The Reluctant Dragon short is about like a little boy who lives in a village where they're like scared of dragons, and then he meets this dragon who's not very scary and he's reluctant to, do things that dragons should do, like breathe fire on a town or something. I don't know. It's been a while since I've seen this movie, but I was actually really impressed when I saw it, and it's cute and enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, I think my favorite part is just seeing what the studio looked like then and comparing it to now, because really not a whole lot has changed as far as the buildings and all of that. But it's just a really cool peek into history, if nothing else, the history of the Disney studios and history of animation and how animated films were made back then. So that's probably my favorite part about it, and I think the thing that makes it so interesting to go back and watch today.
Well, and then following that, there was kind of a short time where Disney was doing these package films. And we talked about that in our animation history series. And, with the war and all that, they kind of couldn't make full-length features. And so there were a few hybrid live-action animation movies in that time. You had Saludos Amigos in 1943, The Three Caballeros, 1945, Fun and Fancy Free, 1947, Melody Time, 48. Any thoughts on those classics there, Katie? I know we talked about some of them on the animation series, but yeah, I mean, those are important too, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think Three Caballeros and Saludos Amigos are probably the two most well-known
right.
Out of that group for sure, and brought us some memorable characters that we've seen crop up in other Disney productions and songs, and they were a product of Disney's trip to South America, where they had learned a lot about the culture and studied the culture. So that makes it interesting to see that, Latin flavor that they brought to those stories and the animation and the music. But those are the two that really stick out in my mind. The others, I know that I've seen at some point, but I don't really remember them. They're really not that memorable in general.
I think Fun and Fancy Free is the one where they do Jack and the Beanstalk with Mickey.
That's true. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Overall, I think those little films are remembered more for the animation than the live action.
Oh, I agree for sure.
Yeah. And even like Fantasia is another example where there's a little bit of live action, and that would have been 1940, but mostly it's animated.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's really just kind of like brief live action interludes kind of in between all the animated sequences. So
right.
it's not so much a hybrid as much as the other films where the live action and the animated elements interact with each other a lot more. And I do recommend still like checking out those hybrid movies, even though I know I didn't sound super enthusiastic about them.
Yeah.
But like the animated sequences are still fun to watch, and they have a lot of memorable characters like Donald and Mickey and the whole gang. So they're definitely worth seeing.
And so in 1946, actually, the controversial film Song of the South was released. It is a hybrid, but it's not like those packaged films at all. Where do you want to start here, Katie? There is a lot to talk about with Song of the South.
I will say, when I was little, we had on VHS tapes some like Disney sing-alongs, and those were all like just clips from different classic Disney films, like song clips and all that. And,
I had those too.
Yeah. So Zippity Doodah from Song of the South is on there. And that, up until recently, was the only scene really from this movie that I had seen in its entirety. Someone was able to get me a copy of it several months back, and I finally watched the whole movie. So, I mean, that just kind of goes to show how hard it is to get a hold of, because Disney will not release it due to the controversy surrounding it.
Right. Well, and, kind of to set up what the controversy is about, this movie was out post Gone with the Wind.
Yes.
I'll go over the story a little bit, but this is set, the time period is Reconstruction era, so post-Civil War as well, probably like, after 1865. So the story, you have this young boy, his name is Johnny, and his parents are separating. He and his mother go live with his grandmother, so his mother's mother, on a plantation in Georgia. And at the time, these African-American workers on the land, they weren't slaves, because this was after slavery had been abolished. So they were like, sharecroppers. So they were living there and working on the plantation, but sharing the land and sharing their crops. The controversy is that it kind of paints slavery in a not so dark light, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it makes plantation life look very idyllic, and like, oh, everything is beautiful, and everyone who works there is so happy, and they get along with the white people living in the house, even though they live in these little shacks and they have to work in the fields all day. And I like that you pointed out that it's set during Reconstruction, because I think one of the biggest misconceptions about this film is that it's set either like pre-Civil War, around the time of the Civil War, when slavery had not been abolished yet. So I think people watch this and they just automatically assume that those characters are slaves. So, technically those characters would be free to go if they didn't want to work for those people, blah, blah, blah. But it's still really cringeworthy to watch the way that this life is portrayed in this film. And that's been portrayed similarly in other films from this time period.
Yeah. I have a copy of the movie that I've had for a long time. Found it at like this random store one time, and that's a story. But yeah, so I never, like, watching it as a kid, I guess, I never thought too much of it. And then you grow up and you learn, like in history class, like, this is a banned movie. And you're like, why? And then you start to learn more and more about it. And then it's like, okay. Well, I rewatched it recently, actually, in preparation for this. And it's almost as if, like, what I gathered, and again, this was my first time watching it probably in years, is that, like, they don't even really acknowledge the fact that these African-American workers are in the position that they're in. It's almost like if a kid is watching this, it's going to have an impression on them, because there's no like acknowledgement that, hey, this is bad. It's just, it's almost like they're saying this is how it was, and it was fine, and it wasn't fine.
Right.
So that's kind of what I took away.
I mean, I definitely agree with that. I think that's a big reason why a lot of people, don't want this film to be released. They don't want to show it to kids, because, kids are familiar with Disney, and they'll see this, and this is Disney, and that's just going to make a wrong impression. I agree with that, but I do think that it should be released, because it feels like Disney is hiding this part of their history. But at the same time, they have, one of the biggest attractions in their theme park is based off of this film. So it's just like a really, really weird thing. But I think it would be nice if it was more accessible in the United States. I know it's been released overseas at different points in time. But, you know, if there's a way to show it to people and children and make them understand, you know, this is not the way that it really was, then it could be an important lesson.
You were mentioning the theme park ride. People don't even realize that Splash Mountain is inspired by Song of the South.
Oh, I know.
People don't realize that Zippity Doo-Dah is from Song of the South.
Yeah. The attraction is just solely, like, associated with the animated portion, you know. There's no, like, mention or anything of the African American characters or any of the characters portrayed by real actors.
Speaking of the animation portion, I mean, that is all based on African American folk tales of the Uncle Remus stories, as they were kind of renamed later on. But it's Brer Rabbit and Brer Bear and Brer Fox, characters that, like, my mom read me the books and stuff when I was a kid. Loved them. They are really funny. And then in the film, Uncle Remus is played by James Baskett, and he so great. I mean, he got an honorary Academy Award.
He did. I believe he's the first African-American man to win an Oscar in any category.
Yeah, I think I read that.
Even though it wasn't competitive, that's still a really big deal.
Yeah, and a great performance. This is the first time that we see Bobby Driscoll, who goes on to star in several of these movies, also the voice of Peter Pan, and he plays little Johnny. Luana Patton as Jenny. She goes on to be in a few more Disney films. And then Hattie McDaniel from Gone with the Wind is in this.
I forgot about that.
Aside from the live action stuff, there are these great, I think there's like 3 animated shorts, in addition to some songs. Like you have Zippity Doo-Dah, you have Laughing Place, which you hear in Splash Mountain as well. And so those are really great. And it would be nice if they would just even release those little animated shorts or something. I don't know. But yeah, I think the movie overall should be re-released. And I believe last year at D23, Whoopi Goldberg, didn't she like try to start, you know, a campaign or something?
Yeah, like after she got her Disney Legend Award, she was like, okay, my first act as a Disney legend is going to be to get Song of the South released. And I was like, okay, Whoopi. But yeah, I mean, she kind of had like the same argument. I don't think the company should be, you know, hiding or ignoring this part of their history.
No.
And I agree with that. And especially since, like I said, they continue to use the animated versions of those characters and attractions and on other shows and products and all of that. It's weird.
Yeah, it's a little awkward too.
It really is.
If you can find Song of the South, I recommend it. You know, for the history, for the film itself. I mean, it's a great film. If you gotta work hard to find that copy. So
you do.
Well, moving on, there is one more hybrid film and one more film in the 40s that was live action, and it's called So Dear to My Heart, and that was released in 1948. I've never seen this movie. Katie, have you seen it?
I don't think I have. If I have, I really don't remember it.
Well, it stars Bobby Driscoll, Luana Patton, Song of the South, and then Burl Ives is in this one too. Yeah. I read.
And also, I think Beulah Bondi and Harry Carey, who were other like really great character actors from that time. So it has a really good live action cast.
It's about a little lamb, a little black wool lamb, and this boy, he wants to show this lamb off at the county fair and that sort of thing. So that's all I can really say. Anything else you know about the movie, Katie?
It probably wasn't. I think it was for this movie and not Song of the South that Bobby Driscoll and Luana Patton were supposedly going to be given like some sort of juvenile Oscar for their performances, and that ended up not happening that year for some reason. But yeah, that's the only trivia that I have.
Well, got to check that one out at some point. 1950, though, Treasure Island was released. It's been a minute since I've seen this one, honestly. So,
Same.
Yeah, but it's based on the popular book by Robert Louis Stevenson. Bobby Driscoll's back, and he's Jim Hawkins. And this was like the first of this kind of era you're going to see where they did these British films.
Yeah.
They had this director, Ken Anakin, who does several films for them, and he goes away and comes back later, actually. But yeah, I mean, what do you remember about Treasure Island, Katie?
I really don't remember anything personally. I believe it was very well received, though, at the time of its release, and this is the first like real live action Disney movie. There's no
Right.
animation in this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's an important milestone. And I think for a long time, I just assumed that 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was the first live action Disney movie. And I think a lot of people do because that's the first big one. But no, it started with this movie. And I know you mentioned that it's a British film, and these next several films are British films. And I think that's because the Disney studios had a bunch of funds that were like frozen overseas.
Yeah.
So they opened up another studio and started making films over there so that they could use that money. So that's where that came from. So it's a lot of like kind of, British dramas and like, costume period dramas, I should say.
Yes. I think the last time I remember seeing this movie, this is so, how do I remember this? But middle school, the night of Spring Fling, my friends and I were not cool enough to go to Spring Fling. So we had like a sleepover kind of night. And I remember
watched Treasure Island.
Well, no, I mean, we were all Disney fans, but we played like Disney Seen It. You remember Seen It?
Oh,
Seen It.
I love Seen It.
Well, we played Disney Seen It the night of the Spring Fling, but like the next morning, I remember waking up and everyone was watching Treasure Island. So that's the last time I remember watching that movie.
It's a long time ago.
I know, but I remember things. No. But yeah, that's Treasure Island. 1952 brought us the release of the story of Robin Hood and his merry men. Hey, there was a live-action Robin Hood before the animated one. Who knew? But I think this is probably I know this is one of many Robin Hood adaptations. And, of course, it's the English folklore, Robin Hood, Maid Marian, Little John, all of the characters. But Richard Todd is Robin Hood. You've seen this one, Katie? I have not.
I have not. I don't remember ever seeing it, and I guess I didn't really realize before that there had been a live-action Disney Robin Hood. Whenever I think of like old live-action Robin Hood, I think of the one starring Errol Flynn from the 30s. So, and that's still like the quintessential Robin Hood.
Right.
But yeah, I'm like really intrigued by this. I'd like to see it, and I think it was again, pretty well received for what it was, just a nice little entertaining adventure film.
Have to check that out sometime. It has been on Turner Classic Movies, and I didn't catch it and didn't record it, I don't think. I did star in a Robin Hood play, and I was actually it wasn't the Merry Men, it was Robin Hood and his Merry Band. And so we were like artists, and my character was like a theater performer. This was a kids Robin Hood production.
Okay.
It was with Missoula Children's Theater, which is a traveling theater company out of Missoula, Montana. And yeah, my character was like the actor, so I had to do Romeo and Juliet, What Light Through Yonder Window Breaks. So,
wow.
Yeah. Fun fact. Has nothing to do with that movie other than Robin Hood. 1953, we get The Sword and the Rose. I have never seen this either, but it's based on a novel called When Knighthood Was in Flower. This is an adventure movie. King Henry VIII's younger sister, Mary Tudor. That's what this is about. If you've seen it, let us know. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Next is Roy the Highland Rogue, and that was 1954. This is like a Scottish story, and it's about Rob Toy McGregor, who was a Scottish outlaw, and he became a folk hero, and this is like an action movie, and it was shot on location in Scotland, I read, so I've never seen that one. Have you seen it?
Nope.
Moving right along then. 1954 also brought us 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And this was kind of like the first little taste of science fiction that we got from Disney there. And it's based on a novel as well. Kirk Douglas is in this movie. Yes. It's set in the mid-19th century. There's like rumors about the sea creature attacking ships in the Pacific Ocean. I don't know. Katie, do you want to take over about the story?
Kirk Douglas's character is, I believe, he's a sailor, maybe something else. I don't remember, but he ends up going on a journey with this professor and the professor's assistant. And they go out to find this creature, and they come into contact with this submarine, and that is commanded by Captain Nemo, who's played by James Gardner. But there's a great attack with the monster that's like a giant squid. and it's the
Yeah.
highlight of the movie.
And this was like way before a bunch of like CGI stuff, of course. So, I mean, looks really great.
Yeah, it was all animatronic.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, but like it's a little creepy, honestly, and as it should be. But there are some lighter moments, and also, okay, I remember it kind of being a little hard to follow. You got to really kind of pay attention and not get lost in this movie.
I mean, it's based on a Jules Verne story, and those were starting to become really popular in films around this time. There were a lot of stories like that, and this is definitely one of the more successful of them and famous of them. And it was really a good way, I think, to attract audiences to the theater and to get them interested in Disney doing live action movies. Because remember, this is a time when television was really becoming popular and theaters were doing everything they could to draw people back to the movie theater by doing things like 3D and other like gimmicky things. And this film was shot in CinemaScope, so widescreen. It was, I think, the first sci-fi movie shot in CinemaScope. And it's like this really big, epic film. A lot of the films from the 50s were these huge, long epics with all-star casts. And I think this is kind of one of those. I mean, it's not like a big biblical epic like Ben-Hur, but you know, you've got Kirk Douglas, James Gardner, Peter Lorre, all these really great, well-known actors in the cast, these great action sequences, great scenery. So yeah, I mean, even if the plot is kind of weird, it's still really entertaining to watch. Ultimately, the story, it doesn't really matter. I hate to say that, but you know, the rest of the film is so impressive that the story kind of takes a back seat, I feel like.
Yeah.
But the Whale of a Tale song, I love that
And that's
song.
with like the seal, right? I remember there's like a seal in this movie on the
Yes, there is. The
Okay.
comic relief.
Well, we're midway through the 50s now, and in 1955, Disney released Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, the first of two Davy Crockett movies that they made. And these were like little compilation films of the Davy Crockett TV miniseries called Davy Crockett. Fess Parker is Davy Crockett. We're about to see a lot of Fess Parker in these movies. But of course, Davy Crockett, his nickname was King of the Wild Frontier. He's an American folk hero. And fun fact, I actually live like in a neighboring town of Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, which is where a lot of the Davy Crockett story takes place. Just saying. The rest of it's in East Tennessee, I guess. But yeah, you've seen this?
I've seen it a few times, actually, I think. And yeah, when you mentioned earlier, like how we see the same stars pop up again in a lot of these films, when you look at the 1950s and Disney live action films, Fess Parker is the standout star. I mean, this film is really fun. It's not it's probably not exactly historically accurate, but because it is, you know, a compilation film, it kind of goes through these episodic periods of Davy Crockett's life. So we see him traveling west, we see him participating in the government, and then it ends at the Alamo, where, of course, in real life, Davy Crockett was killed. But yeah, it's a fun film to watch. I mean, Fess Parker, he is just so the right type for that character. He's very likable. He definitely gives off the air of, you know, this kind of explorer, adventurer from that time period. And this really started this big craze for all things Davy Crockett and Western Frontier, and they were super popular with kids, and it led to, you know, more opportunities for Fess Parker. Of course, there was another Davy Crockett film that you mentioned, and then later on, after all that, he starred as Daniel Boone on TV for at least 5 seasons. And that was basically when you compare like the Davy Crockett films with the Daniel Boone show, which was not Disney. But he's basically like playing the same character.
Yeah.
I want to say too, at Disneyland, Fess Parker has one of the windows, but whereas everybody else has their window on Main Street, his is in Frontierland. So it's very, very appropriate.
Did you have a coonskin hat growing up, Katie, ever?
I did not.
I feel like I might have. I don't know. But yeah, there is another Davy Crockett movie coming up in just a bit. First, though, also in 1955, The Littlest Outlaw. This is a Hispanic film, and, you know, it takes place in Mexico. It's about a young boy whose father is a horse trainer, but an abusive horse trainer. And so the boy runs away with, like, the prize horse, I guess, to kind of save it from being put to death. The cast, they were bilingual, so they could speak English and Spanish. So they shot this movie twice so that they didn't have to like dub it for Spanish-speaking viewers. So I thought that was cool. I've never seen this movie, but
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, and I'd like to know more about this movie. Especially having like such a diverse cast. It doesn't sound like they whitewashed the cast at all. Which is
in
kind
1955.
Of, yeah. So yeah, I'm really intrigued by that film. I hope I get to see it at some point.
1956, we have The Great Locomotive Chase, which I understand you have seen. Fess Parker returns, and this is like Civil War, right?
It is, yeah. Fess Parker plays, I forget what kind of character he plays, but he's basically recruited by the Union Army to go steal this train from the Confederates. So he has to go like behind Confederate lines. So yeah, I mean, it basically is, a lot of the action takes place on board trains from what I remember. And it's based on true events. This really did happen. I actually did, when we lived in Georgia, we went to a museum in Kennesaw, and they have the real train that they were chasing in the movie. Not like the one from the movie, but the one from the real life incident. I mean, it's been so long since I've watched it, but from what I remember, it's a really, really interesting film.
Yeah, that one sounds like one I'd really want to see for sure. 1956, we also got the other Davy Crockett movie, Davy Crockett and the River Pirates. And this was a compilation of the 4th and 5th miniseries stories from the TV show. And I understand that this is a prequel to the other film because, at the end of the other one, Davy Crockett would have died. So.
Yeah. So they can't really like continue his story beyond that. But this is supposed to be like, I think his just kind of journeys, like before he got involved in like government and all that, just kind of his early adventures. And in both of these films, Buddy Ebsen played his friend and sidekick. And yeah, I mean, if you like the first Davy Crockett movie, this one is a lot different because it's not so directly based on his real life, from what I understand. But it's just like fun adventure movie, and Fess Parker is still great, and Buddy Ebsen is great. So yeah.
And Fess Parker is back in the next movie we're talking about too. It's called Westward Ho the Wagons, 1956 as well. And this is a Western, and I think it's about a family that is traveling to Oregon. And I read there's like, kind of the whole, as I say, cowboys and Indians plot, and things work out in the end though. So yeah, I've never seen this one. I also saw where 4 Mickey Mouse Club members are in this movie, so that's cool. And then George Reeves, who was Superman, like in the old Superman series, is in this as well.
Yeah, this was his final feature film performance. George Reeves, of course, died kind of mysteriously soon after. But yeah, I'd like to see it because I love Fess Parker. I love George Reeves.
Yeah, it sounds a little like Little House on the Prairie, but maybe more action or something. I don't know. 1957, we have Johnny Tremaine, and that's kind of a colonial film. You've seen that one, right?
Yeah, it's set in the early days of the American Revolution, which is a time period that I enjoy reading about and watching movies about. And this film, it's not based on true events, but of course it's set against the backdrop of true events, and it's actually based on a novel by Esther Forbes. And it's about this boy, this teenager, and I believe he works as a metal worker, and he injures his hand, and so he can no longer do his trade. And he ends up at some point coming in contact with Paul Revere and gets involved with the Sons of Liberty. But yeah, he ends up kind of going on these adventures with them in the early days of the Revolution. Luana Patton is in it. She is, of course, older now than she was in Song of the South, but she plays his friend. While this movie was being made, Walt Disney kind of became interested in the idea of having like a segment of Main Street in Disneyland devoted to this colonial time and calling it like Liberty Street or something. And of course, that never ended up happening. But when Walt Disney World opened, we got Liberty Square with that eventually. So that was kind of like the early beginnings. And there is a song called, I believe there's a song called Liberty Tree, and there's the Liberty Tree in Liberty Square, right?
Is it a cafe or something?
I don't know. I haven't been to Disney World in so long. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. But I mean, this is, historical fiction. That seems really great. 1957, we also got Old Yeller, and this is like probably my favorite of this episode, at least, that we're going to be talking about. I love this movie so much, and it's probably the one that everyone sees, in their childhood at least one time.
It's definitely one of the most iconic Disney live action movies and really most iconic movies of all time when you think about it. I was thinking about this earlier, and everybody, regardless of whether they've actually seen it or not, they know about Old Yeller and they know this ending, and then it's about this boy and he has to shoot his dog because the dog gets rabies, and it's just like one of those things like, sorry, it's like with Star Wars, like even people who haven't seen Star Wars, like they know that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. People know the boy has to shoot Old Yeller. Like people just know that, but it's just such a huge thing in pop culture now.
Yeah, it's coming, and like there's so much nostalgia for me. I watched this with my grandparents so much. It was one of my grandfather's like favorite movies. So I enjoy like revisiting it from time to time. And it's set in the 1860s in Texas. And there's this frontier family. You got Fess Parker as the dad.
Yes.
Back again. Oh, and also like the cast here, like these are about to be some big names.
Fantastic cast,
yeah. In the Disney live action community, if you will. But you've got Dorothy McGuire. She's the mom. Is her name Katie?
I think so.
Okay.
That sounds right.
Tommy. Yeah. Well, that's your name too. But
well, yes.
Tommy Kirk is the son, or the oldest son, Travis, and then Kevin Corcoran is the younger son, Arliss. And the dad leaves for a cattle drive, and so while he's gone, Travis has to be the man of the house, taking care of the crops and shooting dinner and all this stuff that I know nothing about. This yellow dog shows up, and at first kind of causing some trouble, and then he becomes part of the family, and he's like a mixed breed, like, I don't know, golden retriever and something else maybe, but it's the whole boy and his dog story, and it's so good. It's so good.
So good. And I think part of why it's so good is the character Travis and the dog. They go on such this great arc. Like, it's not like Travis saw this dog and it was like, oh, I love this dog. He hated this dog at first. His little brother was the one who just loved this dog and wanted to keep this dog, and he saw it as a nuisance. And I think it's when the dog ends up defending them, was it from bears? Mm-hmm. That he really starts to see this dog in a new light and forge a relationship with it and come to love it more than anyone else does. So they just go through this beautiful journey.
It was that part, maybe with the bears, but also when he hangs the meat up and Old Yeller doesn't eat the meat overnight. And then the next morning he like smiles at him. It's like, love it. A lot of people really relate to this because so many people go on this, life journey with their dogs as well, in a different way, of course. But for those people who like really had that emotional attachment to their dogs, they can't watch this movie. Like, I know so many people, it's like, I cannot watch it.
Oh, yeah, I know the same thing with a lot of people who are just like, oh, I will never watch that movie. I can't do it. And I think even for me, it was a while before I finally actually got to watch the whole movie. I do remember in second grade, I believe, it was one of our movie days, so they just showed like movies they like broadcast movies on the TV all day, and Old Yeller was on one day, and my friend and I were just like, we can't watch this. Like the end of the movie, when they got to that scene, we like hid under our desks. I don't know. But anyway, I did eventually watch it.
A few more to get to here at the end of the 50s. 1958, The Light in the Forest. Fess Parker again. This is historical fiction. It's the late 18th century, and have you seen this one? Because the story seems really interesting to me. Have you seen it?
I haven't. It's another one of those that I'm not familiar with.
It's about a young male who is a white captive of Native Americans who, after several years of being captive, he doesn't want to go back to white society when they return him. This sounds really intriguing.
That sounds like the John Wayne movie, The Searchers, if you ask me, like a version of that. Now I'm like blanking on what year The Searchers came out, but I'm pretty sure it was before that. 1956. So yeah. But yeah, that Natalie Wood's character in that movie is captured as a child by Native Americans, and then they finally find her all these years later, and she's like disturbed and doesn't want to go with them and all of that. So sounds a little bit like a knockoff to me. But is it based on a book?
A novel.
Okay.
Yeah, it's based on a book. Same name. The book was published in 1953. So,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Another Western in 1958. It's called Tonka. It's another Native American story. It's about a U.S. cavalry horse that survived the Battle of Little Bighorn. I've never seen this one, but it sounds pretty action-packed. I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either, but
Okay.
you know.
All right. Well, and that's kind of the end of this whole Western frontier action adventure. I mean, that's kind of the end of that.
Yeah, the theme of this whole decade, really.
Because in 1959, we kind of switch gears and we go to a comedy. It's called The Shaggy Dog. A lot of people have seen this one. Here comes Fred McMurray into the picture.
Love Fred McMurray.
We're going to be talking about him a lot in future episodes, but this is our introduction to him at Disney or with Disney. Tommy Kirk is back. Annette Funicello from the Mickey Mouse Club is in this. Roberta Shore. The movie was in black and white, which, do you know why it was in black and white in 1959?
I don't know why. And it's, I guess because it wasn't this big, epic action film or Western, and they didn't feel the need to spend money on color for this. Because, it's set in present day, it's comedy.
Right.
I guess I would assume that maybe that's why. But yeah, other than that, it's really odd that it's in black and white. But, we'll see a couple more films, I think, in the early 60s from Disney that, again, are in black and white, like Absent-Minded Professor and all that. But
yeah, I've only seen it in black and white, but I think there's probably been some color versions released at some point.
I'm sure that there is, but don't watch the color versions. Those are always terrible.
Don't watch the remake of this either.
Don't do that either.
Yeah. This is about a young boy who, well, it's kind of a dad and son story, but it's about a young boy. He's a teenager. His dad is actually allergic to dogs, and the father and son don't necessarily get along so much. But this son, he winds up getting this ring that is like cursed, and so it's a shape-shifting curse. And he turns into a sheepdog, and it's like his love interest. It's her sheepdog. It's a comedy, obviously, but it's so funny. And it really was kind of the start of just this comedic era for live-action Disney movies.
Yeah, I mean, this is a kind of a similar theme that we'll see in a lot of Disney movies, starting with this one, especially comedies where they introduce some sort of like weird element, like here the boy turns into a dog. We'll see other like animals with powers and like weird inventions and weird things happening in other Disney comedies and through the 60s and the 70s. So it's kind of the beginning of this recurring theme, but it works. It is like you said, really funny and also a really sweet story of this father and son.
So yeah, we're gonna see that coming up more so in the future episodes. 2 more movies here. 1959, we also have Darby, O'Gill, and the Little People. And this is an Irish movie. It's about leprechauns and an Irishman. And, it's fantasy adventure. I know Sean Connery is in it. Have you watched this?
I want to say that I have, but I don't remember. And I feel bad that I don't remember because it is a pretty well-known Disney film. I think when people think of like the really underrated live action films, this one always comes up. Sean Connery does not play the main character, but the main character ends up getting involved with these leprechauns, and he has like some sort of like feud with them, from what I understand.
Is it a musical? I don't even know if it's a musical.
I don't know if it's so much a musical, but I think that there are several songs in it.
Gotcha. I feel like it goes without saying, but Sean Connery was the original James Bond, so
well, yeah.
In case you didn't know.
If you don't know that, then what are you doing with your life? Honestly.
Keeping it real, Katie, keeping it real. The final film for our episode today, it's called Third Man on the Mountain. I haven't seen it, but this is actually where Ken Anakin comes back. He'd actually gone away. He did some of the British films that we were talking about at the top of the show, went away for a minute and comes back to do this. He will go on to do Swiss Family Robinson. This is a Switzerland movie. It's a mountaineer story about a son who tries to conquer the mountain that killed his father. And I'm assuming that that's the Matterhorn.
I think so. I mean, wasn't this film kind of the inspiration for the Matterhorn Bobsleds at Disneyland?
Yep.
The ride is like you sit in this little like bobsled. It's kind of like a slow coaster. So you get in. I think it seats like 3 to a car, one behind the other, and it takes you like up to the top of the mountain and inside the mountain where the Yeti is, and then you go all the way down, and it's very rough. Last time I went, I noticed they finally installed some cushions on those seats, and they needed them because that ride jerks you around like crazy. But it's really fun. Classic Disneyland ride.
Go watch this movie and then go ride the Matterhorn. But yeah, that's all for this episode, and that concludes the whole 1940s and 50s era there. And next episode, we will do 1960 to 1965. Now, listeners, I'm sorry, but these episodes are going to be a month apart, so you'll just have to have something to look forward to, but be patient with us. But no, we're going to do these like monthly instead of weekly, like we did the animation. But that's it, Katie. One down.
That was fun. Even though I haven't seen so many of those movies, I know the next couple. I know we both have seen some more of them.
Oh, yes.
Most of them.
Well, that's a wrap, and that's all for this episode of Disconnected, Lights, Camera, Live Action Disney History. Katie, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks so much, everyone, for listening. Of course, you can follow mine and Katie's social media links. They will be in the description below. For more Disconnected content, you can follow at Disney_connected on Instagram. And until next time, have a magical day, and I'll see you real soon, folks.